Hey everyone, Wolf Lord Rho here. Today, we are discussing the line that Rogal Dorn will not cross. A spoiler warning to begin, as the events we're discussing today are from the Horus Heresy novel Nemesis by author James Swallow. As always, I really recommend you read the stories for yourself first without spoilers, as that's the best way to enjoy the lore for yourself. But with that said, let's waste no time and just jump straight in. Okay, so the Horus Heresy novel Nemesis covers the events of the first ever Officio Assassinorum execution force, a team that was put together to try and take out the traitor Warmaster. And we discussed the events of that momentous decision earlier in the week. However, there's another equally intriguing aspect of the story, and that is the view of the Imperial Fist Primarch, Rogal Dorn. Now of course Rogal has nothing to do with the Officio Assassinorum, not privy to its inner workings and goings on. However, as the Praetorian of Terror and the man responsible for remodelling the Imperial Palace into a fortress, he is no fool, and trying to conceal any secret movements and meetings anywhere within the continent-sized palace boundary from him is a nigh-on impossibility. And thus, he became aware that something of particular magnitude was starting to be conducted by the Officio. And rather surprisingly, Constantine Valdor appeared to be involved. And so Rogal went to speak with Valdor, awaiting him within the Custodes' sparring hall, technically Custodes' territory within the palace. And Valdor was a little surprised and taken aback to see Rogal there, momentarily unsure how to react, before simply deciding to err on the side of respect, greeting the Primarch with a bow. "Why am I here?" said Dorn, asking Valdor's question for him. "Why am I here and not attendant to my duties on the palace walls?" "You wish to speak to me?" Dorn continued, as if he had not heard his answer. The Primarch glanced up at the ornate ceiling above them, which showed a frieze of jet-bike-born custodians racing across the skyline of the petitioner's city. "I have blighted this place, Valdor, in the name of security. I have made this palace into a fortress, replaced art with cannonades, gardens with kill zones, beauty with lethality. You understand why?" Something in Dorn's tone made the custodian's hand tighten on his weapon. "Because of the war, to protect your father." "I take little pride in my defacement," Dorn replied. "But it must be done, for when Horus comes here, as he will, he must be met by our strength." He advanced a step. "Our honest strength, Valdor. Nothing less will suffice." Valdor remained silent, and Dorn gave him a level, demanding stare. In the quiet moment, the two of them measured one another as each would have gauged the lay of a battlefield before committing to combat. The Imperial Fist broke the lengthening silence. "This palace and we know each other very well now, and I am not ignorant of what goes on in its halls, both those seen and those unseen." His heavy brow furrowed, as if a choice had been made in his thoughts. "We shall speak plainly, you and I." "As you wish," said the custodian. Dorn eyed him. "I know the assassin clades and their shadow killers are mounting an operation of large scope. I know this," he insisted. "I know you are involved." "I am not part of the Officio Assassinorum," Valdor told him. "I have no insight into their inner workings." It was a half-truth at best, and Dorn knew it. As I said, Rogal is no fool. He knows the Assassinorum moving in a way it never has before has meaning, and Valdor being involved means something important. It's a pretty logical assumption to what that could mean. Very few things in the galaxy, particularly at this time, warranting such a threat, such a commitment of resources. And Rogal lets Valdor know his line of thinking with the comment, "For when Horus comes here, as he will, he must be met by our strength, our honest strength, Valdor. Nothing less will suffice." And it's also an early reveal here of Rogal's disdain for the ways of the Officio Assassinorum, the subterfuge the Officio and its operatives engage in. The word honest, stated very intentionally. And even the mention of the work Rogal is doing to the palace, it's Rogal's way of saying, "I don't want to do this, but I do. I have to, because this is the way it must be done." However, what did Rogal really expect here? If Valdor was involved as suspected, as he is, was it really likely he'd talk about it? That he could talk about it? There was no way. But of course Rogal knows that. And maybe this visit is more Rogal's way of appealing to the Captain General, even warning him that whatever he's doing, he's making a mistake. And you could argue that does come across as the conversation continues. "I have always considered you a man of honour, Captain General," said the Primarch, "but as I have learned to my cost, it sometimes becomes necessary to revise one's opinion of a man's character. If what you say was true, then you know it would be a matter of utmost secrecy." Dorn's eyes flashed. "Meaning, if I am not informed of such a thing, then I should not know of it." He advanced again, and Valdor stood his ground. The stoic, unchanging expression on the face of the Imperial fist was, if anything, more disquieting than any snarl of annoyance. "I question the purpose of anything so clandestine. I am Adeptus Astartes, warrior by blood and by birth. I do not support the tactics of cowardice." Valdor let the Guardian Spear's tip drop to the floor. What some consider cowardly, others might call expedient. Dorn's expression shifted for a second, with a curling of his lip. "I have crossed paths with the agents of the Officio Assassinorum on the battlefield. Those encounters have never ended well. Their focus is always too narrow. They are tools best suited for courtly intrigue and the games of empire, not for war." He folded his arms. "Speak, Custodian. What do you know of this?" Valdor stiffened. "I can't say." For a moment, the tension on the Primarch's face resonated through the room, and Valdor's knuckles whitened around the haft of his spear. Then Dorn turned away. "That is unfortunate." Now, Valdor has a point here. If Rogal isn't involved, then yeah, obviously he shouldn't know about it. It's really only because he is fortifying the palace and has reports on absolutely everything that happens within that he does. Who says Rogal should know? And who says it's any of his business? Only Rogal. And that certainly doesn't make him right. And I do find it quite surprising he thought Valdor may tell him. Perhaps out of some form of warrior code, or appealing to his honour, or maybe rightly suspecting that Valdor didn't particularly like that way of war either, the two possessing a sense of honour. And that disdain that he has certainly comes across strongly. although to be fair to Rogal, it definitely appears to be something influenced by his experiences, not something he feels for no reason at all. However, Valdor ends this conversation by basically saying, "We all want the same thing, to safeguard your father, the Emperor." However, Rogal surprisingly disagrees with him, telling him that that's the Custodes' duty. However, his own, as well as all the Primarchs, is to safeguard the Imperium. And when Valdor says, well, that's the same thing, Rogal pointedly says, no, it isn't. And that gives us a further clue to Rogal's rationale, that his objection to the Assassinorum is not rooted in a sense to the Emperor, but in some way to the wider Imperium. And the answer actually comes sometime later, when we see Rogal given a report on Valdor's movements, that the Captain General had been sighted entering another meeting with the Officio, and when that was concluded, an extremely encrypted transmission was sent into orbit, an encryption greatly beyond the Imperial Fist's ability to break. "There is no need to try," said the Primarch, and indeed, to do so would be a violation of protocol. That is a line the Imperial Fists will not cross. Not yet. Efreid's hand strayed to his close-cropped beard. "As you wish, my lord." Dorn was silent for a long moment, and Efreid began to wonder if this was a dismissal, but then his commander spoke again. "It begins with this, Captain. Do you understand? The rot beds in with actions such as these. Wars fought in the shadow instead of the light. Conflicts where there are no rules of conduct. No lines that cannot be crossed." At last he glanced across at his officer. "No honour." Behind him, the sun dipped below the horizon, and the shadows across the balcony grew. "What is to be done?" Efreid asked. He would obey any command his Primarch had cause to utter, without question or hesitation. But Dorn did not answer him directly. There can only be one target worth such subterfuge, such a gathering of forces. The Officio Assassinorum mean to kill my errant brother, Horus. Efreid considered this. Would that not serve our cause? "It might appear so to those with a narrow view," replied the Primarch, "but I have seen what the assassin's bullet wreaks in its wake. And I tell you this, brother Captain, we will defeat Horus, but if his death comes in a manner such as the Assassinorum intend, the consequences will be terrible, and beyond our capacity to control. If Horus falls to an assassin's hand, there will be a gaping vacuum at the core of the turncoat fleet, and we cannot predict who will fill it, or what terrible revenges they will take. As long as my brother lives, as long as he rides at the head of the traitor legions, we can predict what he will do. We can match Horus, defeat him on even ground. We know him." Dorn let out a sigh. "I know him." He shook his head. "The death of the War Master will not stop the war." So, Rogal will not cross the line of trying to hack censored Imperial messages yet. But the real line he will not cross is fighting a war in the shadow, using operatives like the Officio Assassinorum. To do that, in his mind, is to give license for anything and everything. To have it so every rule of war no longer matters. As he sums it up, no honour. And I see his point. Indeed, that is how rot sets in, how decline begins, by allowing yourself to take action, you may not otherwise have done, an action you would never have previously considered. And there's a definite logic to that, and I can understand why Rogal feels the way he does. However, I'm not sure I agree with his reasoning after, for why they shouldn't want the War Master eliminated. I absolutely disagree that not knowing who would fill the vacuum would be worse, or that the traitors would seek revenge, because it is all about Horus Lupercal. All of it. He is by far and away the biggest threat. The only real threat in truth. No other traitor Primarch has a hope of keeping their cause unified. None. And I think with Horus gone, they would soon begin to turn against each other, and begin to go their separate ways, or simply implode. However, from the moral standpoint, the what's right and wrong, the question of what do you give up of yourself to win, now that is where Rogal has a point, where his position makes sense. What takes you from being in the right to no different from those who betrayed you? And you can easily see here why Rogal has so many issues with Alfarius and the Alpha Legion elsewhere. But hey, maybe the fact that the Alpha Legion even exist were part of the Emperor's plan, and that the Imperium founded the Assassinorum, should maybe make Rogal rethink his position somewhat. Because clearly the Emperor wanted his war to be fought in every way possible. However, at the end of the day, that was just how Rogal was made. Like all of his brothers, a victim to his own nature, his own design. And for him, fighting a war in the shadow with unseen weapons is a line he will not cross. But as always everyone, what do you think? What do you think of Rogal's position here? Why do you think he approached Valdor? Do you think he honestly expected Valdor to say something? And was it because they shared the warrior's honour? Or do you think there was perhaps another reason? And is Rogal right in his logic, that to fight a war in shadow, to take actions you would never have considered before, is the road to ruin? And do you also think that he is right, that if Horus was to fall in this way, it would only make things worse? Or like me, do you disagree with the Praetorians' thinking there? As always everyone, leave your thoughts in the comments below. A huge thank you to all my subscribers, your support truly means a lot to me, it really does. If you're new, please consider subscribing to help the channel grow. And if you enjoyed this particular vid, then why not drop a like on it too. But with that said, I am off, and I'll see you all again real soon.